My CEO wife fired and divorced me, so I told my assistant to end every contract. Why did his CEO wife believe she could remove him from both the company and her life? What would happen after he gave his assistant one final instruction? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to KFIVE Stories, where ruthless decisions, concealed influence, and shocking reversals unfold. Before today's story begins, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable episode. Thank you for watching, commenting, sharing, and continuing to support our channel. Every bit of encouragement helps KFIVE Stories reach more people around the world. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there right now. We truly appreciate having you as part of this growing community. Now, get comfortable, follow every detail, and let us enter the beginning of today's powerful story. The woman who ordered security to remove me from her company was the same woman who once held my hand and promised we would build an empire together. I still remember the sound of that sentence. Not because it was loud, not because it was cruel, because Victoria said it quietly, calmly, like she was discussing a routine business decision instead of ending 12 years of marriage and erasing the man who helped build everything she had. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my life, I believed success was something you built with patience, sacrifice, and the right person beside you. I wasn't the man who chased attention. I wasn't the man standing on magazine covers or shaking hands under camera flashes. That was Victoria, my wife. Victoria Hayes Carter, the CEO everyone wanted to meet, the woman investors trusted, the woman employees followed, the woman who could walk into a room full of executives and make everyone believe the future was already hers. And maybe that was the problem, because somewhere along the way, Victoria started believing that future belonged only to her. Years earlier, things were different. When I met Victoria, she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a symbol of success. She was a young woman with ambition, intelligence, and a dream that was bigger than her bank account. I remember sitting with her in a small coffee shop downtown, watching her sketch ideas on napkins while explaining the company she wanted to build. Everyone else saw an impossible dream. I saw someone worth believing in. So I did what I always did. I stayed. I helped. I built quietly. While Victoria became the face of the company, I became the foundation underneath it. I handled negotiations nobody knew about. I created strategies that never carried my name. I connected people, protected deals, and solved problems before they ever reached her desk. And I never complained, because I didn't need recognition from the world. I thought recognition from my wife was enough. For a long time it was. We celebrated our first major contract with cheap champagne in a tiny apartment kitchen. We laughed about how one day we would look back and remember when we had nothing. Victoria squeezed my hand that night and said something I never forgot. Ethan, when this company succeeds, it will be because we did it together. I believed her. That was the man I was. A man who believed promises mattered. But success changes people. Not overnight. Not dramatically. It happens slowly. A missed dinner becomes normal. A conversation becomes an update. A partner becomes an assistant. At first, I ignored the signs. Victoria was busy. She was running a company. Pressure came with the position. That was what I told myself. But then I noticed something different. She stopped asking for my opinion. She started asking for my approval. There was a difference. One showed respect. The other expected permission. The first time I felt like a stranger in my own marriage was during a company event. I stood near the back of the room while Victoria accepted an award for leadership. Everyone applauded. Everyone praised her vision. Nobody mentioned the nights we spent building that vision together. Nobody mentioned the contracts I negotiated. Nobody mentioned the years I spent making sure her dreams survived. And when I looked at Victoria, I expected to see the woman who once believed in us. Instead, I saw a CEO looking at an employee. That should have been the moment I understood. But love has a strange way of making you defend the person hurting you. You create excuses. You explain away the impossible. You convince yourself the person you love is simply tired. Until one day, they stop pretending. And that day came on a Monday morning. I walked into the headquarters of Hayes Global expecting another ordinary meeting. Instead, I found Victoria sitting at the end of the conference table. A folder was placed in front of her. My name was written on it. She looked at me with a face I barely recognized. No anger. No sadness. Just business. Ethan, she said, we need to discuss your position. The room was silent. And somehow, Before she even said the words, I already knew. The woman I helped build had finally decided I was no longer useful. What Victoria didn't know was that removing me from the company would be the biggest mistake she had ever made. Because she thought she was firing an employee. She had no idea she was awakening the person who built the entire foundation beneath her empire. The most painful thing about being betrayed isn't losing what you built. It's watching the person you built it for convince themselves they built it alone. That was the thought running through my mind as I sat across from Victoria in the conference room where we had once celebrated our first $1 million contract. The same room, the same table, the same walls covered with awards and photographs of Hayes Global's greatest achievements. Except this time, my name wasn't on the achievements. It was on a termination document. Victoria sat at the head of the table, surrounded by executives who once asked for my advice. Now they avoided my eyes like looking at me would make them uncomfortable. That was when I understood something. This wasn't a business meeting. It was a performance. Victoria wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses. She wanted everyone to see that she was the one with power. Ethan, she said, opening the folder in front of her. This decision was not easy. I almost smiled. Because there was one thing I knew about Victoria. She never made difficult decisions slowly. She made them after she had already convinced herself she was right. You're removing me from the company, I said. Her expression didn't change. I'm restructuring leadership. A softer word. A cleaner word. People in corporate offices love words that make painful things sound harmless. They don't fire people. They optimize. They don't betray partners. They make strategic adjustments. They don't destroy trust. They redefine priorities. But underneath all those polished phrases, the meaning is always the same. Someone decided you were no longer valuable. Victoria folded her hands. Your role has become unnecessary. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it hurt. Because it revealed everything. For years, I had convinced myself Victoria's ambition was our shared dream. I believed her confidence came from knowing she had someone beside her who would always support her. But somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as her partner. She started seeing me as a reminder of a version of herself she wanted to forget. The room stayed silent. Ryan Mitchell, her COO, leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. Ryan was the kind of man who measured success by how many people noticed him. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from standing beside someone powerful and pretending you created the power yourself. I think this is the right move for everyone, Ryan said. Everyone. A word people use when they mean themselves. I looked at Victoria. Years ago, she would have challenged anyone who spoke to me that way. Now she simply nodded. That hurt more than the termination. Because losing a job is temporary. Realizing someone no longer respects you is something different. I reached into my pocket and placed my access card on the table. The small plastic rectangle that had opened every door in that building for 12 years. Victoria looked at it. For a brief second, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Regret, doubt, maybe even sadness. But it disappeared quickly. The CEO returned. Security will escort you out, she said. The words landed heavier than I expected. Not because I couldn't leave. I could. I had walked away from bigger things before. But because the woman who once promised to stand beside me was now treating me like a stranger. I stood slowly. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. I adjusted my jacket, picked up my personal notebook, and looked around the room one last time. All those years. All those sacrifices. All those moments nobody knew about. Gone with one signature. Or at least that was what they believed. As I walked toward the door, Ryan smiled. A small smile. The kind people give when they think they have one. But he didn't know what I knew. Victoria didn't fire the person who was holding the company together. She removed the person who was protecting it. And there was something else they didn't know. My assistant, Olivia Bennett, had been waiting for my call all morning. She wasn't waiting to help me save my position. She was waiting for permission to begin the next move. Because the truth about Hayes Global had never been written on the walls. It was hidden inside the contracts. The ownership agreements. The documents nobody in that room had ever bothered to read. I stepped into the elevator, watching the conference room disappear behind closing doors. For 12 years, I had protected Victoria's empire. Now she was about to discover what happened when the person protecting the empire stopped protecting it. And the first call I made after leaving the building would change everything. The divorce papers were waiting for me before I even had time to process losing my job. And the strangest part was this. I wasn't the one who felt like they had lost something. I sat alone in the parking garage beneath Hayes Global, holding a cardboard box filled with things that used to belong to my office. A coffee mug, a few notebooks, a photograph from 12 years ago, Victoria and me standing in front of the first building we rented. Back then, there was no empire, no glass towers, no executives, just two people with a dream and a reason to believe tomorrow would be better. I stared at that photograph longer than I should have, because the man looking back at me didn't look like someone who had just been fired. He looked like someone who still believed the person beside him would never become his enemy. I drove home that evening without turning on the radio. The silence inside the car felt heavier than any argument. When I opened the front door, I expected to see Victoria. I expected anger. I expected questions. Maybe even an apology. Instead, I found a single envelope sitting on the kitchen table. My name was written across the front. Ethan Carter. The same handwriting that used to leave notes beside my coffee every morning. The same handwriting that once said, "Don't forget we're a team." I opened it. The first page was exactly what I expected. A divorce petition. For a few seconds, I didn't move. Not because I was surprised. Because some part of me was still waiting for this to become a misunderstanding. A mistake. Anything except reality. Then I saw the date. Victoria had prepared it weeks ago. Weeks. Before she fired me. Before that meeting. Before she looked me in the eyes and pretended it was just business. She didn't make a decision that morning. She executed a plan. I leaned back in the chair and let that truth settle. The person I loved hadn't suddenly changed. She had simply stopped hiding who she had become. An hour later, Victoria walked through the door. Perfect hair. Perfect suit. Perfect confidence. The same image the world saw every day. She placed her keys on the counter and looked at me. "You got the papers." It wasn't a question. I nodded. For a moment, we just stood there. Two people who once knew everything about each other. Now strangers sharing the same room. "Ethan," she said, "I think this is better for both of us." That sentence. People always say things like that when they mean it is better for them. I looked at her carefully. "Was this your plan before you removed me from the company?" Her expression changed slightly. Just for a second. Then the CEO returned. "This isn't about the company." But it was. Everything was. Because Victoria didn't just want a divorce. She wanted a new identity. One where she could tell everyone she built Hayes Global alone. One where my name disappeared from the story. "I need someone beside me who understands where I'm going," she said. I almost laughed. Because I knew exactly where she was going. Higher. Faster. Further away from the person she used to be. "What about where we started?" I asked. Her silence answered before her words did. "That was a long time ago, Ethan. A long time ago." Funny how people use those words when they want to erase the sacrifices that helped them get where they are. I looked down at the divorce papers, then back at her, and something inside me became quiet. Not angry, not broken, just clear. For years, I had fought to protect a marriage that Victoria had already left emotionally. I had stayed because I remembered who she was. But maybe I needed to accept who she had become. "I'll sign," I said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She expected a fight. She expected me to beg. She expected the man who spent years supporting her to struggle when she walked away. But I didn't. I simply picked up the pen. Because what Victoria didn't understand was that losing her wasn't the end of my life. It was the moment I stopped living inside someone else's dream. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet house. The house we bought after the company's first major success. The house where we celebrated every milestone. The house where she once told me we would grow old together. I looked at my phone. One name was waiting in my contacts. Olivia Bennett. My assistant. The only person who knew the full story. The only person who understood that Ethan Carter wasn't just a former executive. I pressed call. She answered immediately. "Mr. Carter," Olivia said softly, "I assume it's time." I looked out the window at the city lights. The same city where Victoria believed she had everything under control. "Yes," I said. My voice was calm. Steady. The same voice I had used for years while protecting her empire. "And every contract." There was a pause. Then Olivia replied with the words I knew would change everything. "Understood." Because Victoria thought she had taken everything from me. She thought she had removed the one obstacle standing between her and complete control. She had no idea the man she divorced was the reason her entire empire existed in the first place. And now, for the first time in 12 years, I was no longer protecting her future. I was taking back mine. The person everyone ignored in the room was the person who knew exactly how the entire building stood. That was the truth Victoria was about to discover. But before she learned it, there was one person who had known it all along. Olivia Bennett. For 12 years, Olivia had been more than my assistant. She was the person who organized my schedule, managed my private communications, and protected the details of my life that nobody else ever saw, including the details of my marriage. She knew the late nights. She knew the sacrifices. She knew how many times I stayed awake until 3 in the morning reviewing contracts while Victoria slept because she had an important presentation the next day. She knew because she was there. Unlike everyone at Hayes Global, Olivia never confused silence with weakness. That was why she was the only person I trusted with the truth. I met Olivia 3 years after Victoria, and I started building Hayes Global. At the time, the company was growing faster than we expected. Victoria was becoming the public face. Investors wanted her. The media wanted her. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman they believed was creating the next billion-dollar company. But while Victoria was standing under the spotlight, someone had to handle everything happening in the shadows. That was where I worked. Quietly, carefully, without recognition. Because I understood something most people never learn. Real power doesn't always need attention. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one nobody notices. Olivia understood that. The first time I interviewed her, she asked me a question nobody else had ever asked. Mr. Carter, why are you applying for an assistant when you clearly belong in the executive office? I remember looking at her for a moment. Most people saw my position and assumed I had fallen behind. They saw me supporting Victoria and believed I had no ambition of my own. But Olivia saw something different. She saw intention. I'm not interested in being seen, I told her. I'm interested in building something that lasts. She nodded, and from that day forward, she became one of the few people who understood the difference between being invisible and being powerless. The morning after Victoria served me divorce papers, Olivia arrived at my home. She didn't bring sympathy. She didn't bring unnecessary questions. She brought a laptop and a folder. Because she knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. She placed the folder on the table. Everything is ready. I looked at the documents. For years, these files had remained locked away. Not because they were illegal. Not because they were secret for any harmful reason. Because I never thought I would need them. The ownership agreements. The original investment structures. The contracts that protected the foundation of Hayes Global. The documents showing that the company Victoria was leading had been built on a framework I created years before she became CEO. I opened the first page. My signature was there. Not as an employee. Not as an advisor. As the original founder. Olivia watched my expression. Did you ever think she would do this? I stayed silent. Because the answer was complicated. A part of me knew Victoria had changed. A part of me saw the distance growing between us. But another part of me still believed the woman I loved was somewhere underneath the CEO persona. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I held on to a memory instead of accepting reality. She believed she built everything herself, Olivia said. I closed the folder. No, I replied. She believed the world needed to believe that. And that difference mattered. Because this was never about taking credit. It was never about proving I was smarter than her. It was about understanding what happened when someone destroyed the very foundation holding them up. Olivia looked at me carefully. Are you sure about this? I knew what she meant. Once those contracts changed, once those agreements were activated, there would be no going back. Victoria would have to face the truth she had avoided for years. The man she dismissed, the man she replaced, the man she removed from her company, was the reason her company existed. I walked toward the window and looked at the city. Thousands of lights, thousands of stories. Some people built their success by making themselves visible. Others built it by making sure everything worked when nobody was watching. I spent 12 years choosing the second path. But Victoria had mistaken my patience for weakness. She mistook my loyalty for dependence. And now she was about to learn the difference. Send the notices, I said. Olivia opened her laptop. One question. I looked back at her. Which contracts first? I thought about Victoria sitting in her office, thinking she had finally won, thinking she had removed the only obstacle between herself and complete control. Then I remembered the way she looked at me when she said I was no longer useful. And I answered calmly. All of them. Olivia nodded. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. And somewhere across the city, Inside the company Victoria believed belonged only to her, the first pieces of the truth began moving. She had fired me. She had divorced me. She had erased my name from her story. But she forgot one important thing. You can remove a person from a building. You can remove their title. You can remove their office. But you cannot remove the person who built the foundation. And the moment that foundation started to move, everyone would finally see who was really holding up the empire. The first contract to collapse was not the biggest one. It was the one nobody expected to fail. That was how the world began to notice something was wrong inside Hayes Global. At first, nobody paid attention. A delayed meeting. A missed confirmation. A partner asking for clarification. Small things. The kind of things executives ignore when they believe they are still in control. And Victoria believed she was completely in control. For 3 days after my departure, she moved through the company exactly as she always had. Confident. Focused. Untouchable. The headlines still called her a visionary CEO. The employees still greeted her with respect. The investors still believed they were backing the same unstoppable leader. She had removed the one person she thought was slowing her down. Me. And in her mind, everything was finally going to move faster. But there was one thing Victoria never understood. Companies don't survive because of the person standing at the top. They survive because of the invisible systems underneath. The relationships, the agreements, the trust built over years. The things nobody notices until they disappear. On the 4th morning after my termination, Victoria walked into her office expecting a normal schedule. Instead, she found Ryan Mitchell waiting. His usual confidence was gone. No perfect smile. No relaxed posture. Just a man holding a tablet and trying to figure out how to explain a problem he didn't understand. "We have an issue with the Avalon partnership," Ryan said. Victoria barely looked up. "What kind of issue?" "The renewal documents were rejected." She paused. "Rejected by who?" Ryan hesitated. "The partner's legal department." Victoria leaned back. "That doesn't make sense. The agreement was already approved." Ryan looked uncomfortable. "It was approved under specific ownership conditions." That sentence changed everything. Because Victoria knew contracts. She understood negotiations. But there were details of the company she had never personally handled. Details she assumed other people were managing. Details she assumed didn't matter. "What ownership conditions?" she asked. Ryan placed the tablet on the desk. Victoria scanned the document. Then she saw it. A clause she had never paid attention to. A clause that had been included years earlier. A clause connected to the original founder agreement. My agreement. For the first time since I left, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. Not fear. Not yet. Just the uncomfortable feeling that something existed outside her control. She immediately called the legal department. "Why wasn't I informed about this clause?" The attorney on the other end became quiet. "Because Mr. Carter handled those agreements personally." My name. Again. Even after I was gone, my name was still attached to the foundation she was standing on. Victoria ended the call. She stared through the glass walls of her office. The same office where she had once told me I no longer belonged. The same office where she believed she had finally removed the last reminder of her past. But the past was not gone. It was everywhere. Meanwhile, Olivia continued executing every instruction I gave her. One by one. Contract by contract. Not destroying anything. Not breaking anything. Simply allowing the agreements to return to the person who originally created them. That difference mattered. Because this wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional. This was correction. The next day, another message arrived. A major investor requested an emergency review. Then another. Then another. Suddenly, the same people who once called Victoria a genius were asking questions. Questions she didn't have answers for. During an emergency executive meeting, Ryan tried to remain calm. "We need to understand what Ethan changed before he left." Victoria looked at him sharply. "Ethan didn't change anything." Ryan hesitated. "Then why are all these contracts connected to him?" Silence filled the room. Because nobody wanted to say the obvious. The man they had treated like an employee had been holding more power than anyone realized. Victoria looked around the table. The executives who once watched her remove me without hesitation. Now they were looking at her for answers. And she had none. That evening, Victoria returned home alone. The house felt different. Quieter. Larger. She walked past the room where I used to work. The room she once called unnecessary. On the desk was an old notebook she had forgotten about. She opened it. Inside were pages of ideas from years ago. Plans, strategies, notes about the company. My handwriting, her handwriting, our handwriting. For the first time, she saw the truth she had avoided. The empire she thought she built alone had always been built by two people. And the man she removed from her life was the one person capable of showing her how fragile everything had become. Victoria closed the notebook. Then her phone rang. Ryan. His voice was tense. Victoria. She already knew something was wrong. What happened? A pause. Then the words she never expected. The board wants an explanation about Ethan Carter. Victoria looked out at the city lights. The city where she had spent years proving she was powerful. But now, for the first time, she wondered if she had mistaken having the title for having the control, because the man she fired was no longer fighting for a place inside her empire. He was standing outside it, and every wall she built was beginning to reveal who actually created the foundation. The boardroom was the place where Victoria thought she had the most power. It was also the place where she would finally discover how little control she actually had. For years, Victoria Hayes Carter had walked into that room and watched everyone follow her lead. Executives listened. Investors agreed. Employees waited for her decisions. The large glass table in the center of the room had become a symbol of everything she had achieved. Or at least, everything she believed she had achieved. But that morning was different. The atmosphere felt heavier. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered their usual words of encouragement. Because everyone in that room knew something was wrong. The contracts were changing. The investors were asking questions, and the company that once seemed unstoppable was suddenly filled with uncertainty. Victoria entered the room with the same confidence she always carried. She placed her phone on the table and looked around. Let's begin. Nobody moved. That silence bothered her more than any argument could have. Ryan cleared his throat. The board members have requested a review of the company's ownership structure. Victoria looked at him. Ownership structure? Yes. She frowned. Why? Ryan looked down at his notes. Because several major agreements are connected to Ethan Carter. The room became quiet. Again, that name. Her husband's name. The man she had removed from her company. The man she had convinced herself was no longer important. Victoria leaned forward. Ethan was an executive consultant. Nobody answered. And that was when she realized something. They weren't correcting her. They were waiting for her to understand. The legal director slowly opened a folder. Victoria, there are documents you need to review. She looked at the papers placed in front of her. The first page contained information from 12 years ago. The beginning. Before the headquarters. Before the awards. Before the headlines. Before she became known as the woman who built Hayes Global. Her eyes moved across the document. Then stopped. Founder agreement. Her fingers became still. Because beside her name was another name. Ethan Carter. Not advisor. Not consultant. Not employee. Founder. For a moment, the room disappeared. She heard nothing except the memories she had tried to bury. Ethan sitting beside her in that small apartment. Ethan reviewing her business plans. Ethan telling her she was capable of building something great. She remembered those moments. But she had rewritten them. Over time, she had convinced herself that Ethan was simply someone who supported her success. Not someone who created the path toward it. What is this? She whispered. The legal director answered carefully. These agreements were structured so that strategic control remained protected. Protected by who? Nobody needed to answer. She already knew. Ethan. The man she called unnecessary. The man she told no longer belonged. The man she removed from the company with security watching. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. So what happens now? Victoria looked at him. For the first time, she noticed something. Ryan wasn't looking at her like a leader. He was looking at her like someone who needed an answer. And she didn't have one. Across the city, I sat quietly in my office. Not the office I lost. A different one. A smaller one. A place where nobody knew my name. And that was exactly how I preferred it. Olivia walked in carrying a report. It started. I looked up. How bad? She placed the document on the table. Not bad. She paused. Necessary. That was the difference. I wasn't trying to destroy Victoria. I wasn't trying to make her suffer. I simply stopped holding everything together for someone who believed I was the weakest part of the structure. Olivia sat across from me. Do you think she understands now? I looked out the window. The city was moving like nothing had happened. People rushing. Cars passing. Businesses opening. The world rarely notices when power shifts. It happens quietly, behind closed doors, inside documents, through decisions made by people who never need applause. She will, I said, eventually, because the hardest truth for someone like Victoria was not losing control. It was realizing she never had as much control as she thought. Back at Hayes Global, the emergency meeting continued. The board members reviewed every agreement, every clause, every decision made years earlier. And slowly, the picture became clear. Ethan had never been standing behind Victoria because he lacked ambition. He stood behind her because he chose to. There was a difference she failed to understand. The chairman of the board finally looked at Victoria. "We need to know one thing." She looked up. "What? Where is Ethan Carter now?" The question stayed in the room. Because nobody knew. Not the executives. Not the investors. Not even Victoria. The man they thought they had removed had disappeared completely. And somehow, that made him more powerful. Victoria stared at the empty seat across the table. The seat where Ethan used to sit during every important decision. The seat she once believed belonged to someone who followed her. Now she understood. He wasn't following her. He was allowing her to lead. And there was a painful difference between those two things. Her phone suddenly vibrated. A message appeared. From Olivia Bennett. Just one sentence. "The final review has been completed." Victoria's heart tightened. Because she knew there was more coming. She had fired Ethan. She had divorced Ethan. She had tried to erase Ethan. But the one thing she couldn't erase was the truth. The company she believed was her greatest achievement was built on the foundation of the man she had just lost. The first time Victoria saw me after everything happened, she didn't see a defeated husband. She saw the man she had spent years refusing to understand. The invitation arrived 2 days after the emergency board meeting. A simple message. A location. A time. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. Just a request for Ethan Carter to attend a special executive review at Hayes Global. For a moment, I stared at the screen. The same company that removed my access card. The same building where security walked me out. The same people who watched silently as Victoria ended my position. Now they wanted me back. But this time, it wasn't as an employee. Olivia stood beside my desk. "Are you going?" I looked at the message again. Years ago, I would have answered immediately. Because years ago, I would have gone there to fix things. To protect Victoria. To protect the company. To protect the dream we built together. But things were different now. "I'll go," I said. Olivia nodded. Then they finally have to face the truth. The truth. A simple word. But sometimes the truth is the hardest thing for people to accept. Especially when it destroys the story they created for themselves. The next morning, I walked through the doors of Hayes Global for the first time since Victoria fired me. The building looked exactly the same. The same marble floors. The same glass walls. The same employees rushing through the lobby. But something felt different. People looked at me. Not with pity. Not with judgment. With uncertainty. Because rumors move faster than official announcements. Everyone knew something had changed. They just didn't know what. I stepped into the elevator. The same elevator I had used thousands of times. The same elevator where Victoria and I once celebrated small victories. The same elevator where she once rested her head on my shoulder after 18-hour workdays and said, "One day, we'll look back and be proud of this." I closed my eyes for a moment. Because those memories were real. That was the hardest part. The past wasn't fake. The love wasn't fake. The dreams weren't fake. But somewhere along the way, Victoria had forgotten who was standing beside her when those dreams were still only ideas. The elevator doors opened. The boardroom was waiting. When I walked inside, every conversation stopped. Victoria was already there. She looked different. Not physically. She was still the same confident CEO. Same posture. Same professional appearance. But something behind her eyes had changed. For the first time in years, she looked uncertain. Ryan sat across the table. The man who once smiled when security escorted me out. Now he avoided looking directly at me. The chairman of the board stood. "Mr. Carter." I nodded. "Chairman." Victoria watched the exchange. Carefully. Because she was seeing something she had never noticed before. Respect. Not the kind given to a CEO. The kind given to someone who earned it long before anyone knew his name. I took my seat. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Victoria finally broke the silence. "Ethan." Hearing my name from her felt strange. Not because she said it differently. Because I realized how long it had been since she said it like my wife. "I need answers," she said. I looked at her. About what? Her expression tightened. About everything. I almost smiled, because that was the first honest thing she had said to me in a long time. Not about business. Not about strategy. About everything. The chairman placed the documents on the table. The board has reviewed the original agreements. He looked at Victoria, and there are concerns regarding the ownership structure. Victoria didn't look away from me. Why didn't you tell me? The question was quiet, almost emotional. I sat there for a moment, because I had asked myself that question many times. Why didn't I tell her? Why did I stay behind the scenes? Why did I allow everyone to believe she built everything alone? The answer was simple. Because I loved her. I wanted you to succeed because you deserved success, I said. Victoria looked at me. But you let everyone believe I did it alone. Yes. She seemed surprised by my answer. Why? I looked around the room. At the executives. At the people who only saw titles. At the people who measured importance by visibility. Because I never needed the world to know what I built. A silence followed. Then I looked back at her. But I never expected the person I built it with to forget. That was the moment Victoria finally looked away. Not because she was angry. Because she knew. She knew every word was true. For years, she believed my silence meant I had nothing to say. She believed my patience meant I had no power. She believed my support meant I needed her. But she had misunderstood everything. The chairman opened another file. There is one more matter. Victoria looked up. What matter? He placed the document in front of everyone. The final ownership clause. My eyes met. Olivia's. She gave a small nod. Everything was ready. The final piece. The truth Victoria had never seen. The truth that would completely change how she viewed the man sitting across from her. The chairman began reading. And for the first time, Victoria realized the man she divorced wasn't trying to take her empire away. He was the reason it existed. And now, everyone in that room was about to hear it. The hardest thing to take back was never the company. It was the part of myself I had given away while trying to make someone else successful. The room remained silent after the chairman finished reading the final ownership clause. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because everyone inside that boardroom was trying to process the same reality. The man they had treated as a supporting character had always been the person controlling the direction of the story. Victoria stared at the document in front of her. Her eyes moved slowly across every line, every signature, every agreement, every detail she had overlooked. And then she finally understood. Ethan Carter had never been an employee at Hayes Global. He had never been someone who simply stood behind her success. He was the person who created the structure that allowed her success to exist. She looked up at me. Why? Her voice was quieter than before. Not the voice of a CEO. The voice of a woman trying to understand the person she thought she knew. Why didn't you tell me? I held her gaze. Because that question had no simple answer. How could I explain that I never wanted power over her? How could I explain that every time the world praised her, I felt proud instead of forgotten? I didn't need a title. I didn't need a spotlight. I only needed to know that the person beside me remembered why we started. I thought you already knew, I said. Victoria looked confused. Knew what? That we were building this together. The words hit harder than any accusation could have. Because they weren't meant to hurt her. They were simply the truth. For years, Victoria had convinced herself that I was just the person who supported her dream. But she never stopped to ask why I was always the person everyone called when things became complicated. Why investors trusted my decisions. Why major partners requested my approval. Why the most important agreements carried my signature. She thought I was behind her because I had nowhere else to stand. She never considered that I was behind her because I chose to be there. Ryan looked uncomfortable. The confidence he once carried was gone. The same man who smiled when I was removed from the company now looked like he wished he had never underestimated me. Ethan, he said carefully, why keep something like this hidden? I looked at him. Because ownership was never the point. He didn't understand. Most people don't. They believe power is about control, about making others recognize your importance. But I learned something different. Power is having the ability to take everything and still choosing not to. For 12 years, I had that ability. And I chose love. I chose partnership. I chose Victoria. But she chose to forget. The chairman closed the file. There is one final decision that needs to be made. Everyone turned toward me. Because they knew the next move belonged to me. The same person they ignored. The same person they removed. The same person who now held the future of the company in his hands. Victoria looked at me. And for the first time since I met her, she looked afraid. Not afraid of losing money. Not afraid of losing status. Afraid of losing me. Ethan, she said softly. I waited. If you wanted control back, why didn't you just take it? That question stayed between us. Because the answer revealed everything. I didn't want control back. I paused. I wanted respect. Her expression changed. Because that was the thing she never understood. This was never about winning. It was never about humiliating her the way she humiliated me. It was never about proving I was more powerful. It was about proving that my silence had never meant I was weak. I looked around the room. Hayes Global doesn't need someone who destroys it because they are angry. Everyone listened. It needs someone who understands why it was created. The chairman nodded slowly. So what happens now? I looked at Victoria, the woman I once planned to grow old with, the woman who became a stranger, the woman who now had to face the consequences of forgetting the person who stood beside her. I'm not taking the company away from her. Victoria looked surprised. You're not? No, I leaned back. But things are changing. The room became still. Victoria can remain CEO. Ryan looked shocked. The board members exchanged glances. But she will no longer lead based on ego. I looked at Victoria. She will lead based on responsibility. For a moment, nobody spoke. Because they expected revenge. They expected anger. They expected me to destroy everything. But revenge was easy. Anyone could burn something down. The difficult thing was knowing what deserved to be rebuilt. After the meeting ended, Victoria stayed behind. Everyone left, leaving only the two of us in the room where everything had changed. She stood near the window. I was wrong about you. I looked at her. Those words would have meant everything years ago. Now they simply meant something. I know. She turned around. I thought you didn't care about success. I cared. A pause. I just cared about us more. Her eyes became emotional. For the first time, I saw the woman I fell in love with. Not the CEO. Not the public image. Just Victoria. But some wounds don't disappear because someone finally understands them. Some bridges cannot be rebuilt with a single apology. I picked up my coat. As I walked toward the door, Victoria called my name. Ethan. I stopped. She looked at me. Is this really over? I thought about the years behind us. The memories. The pain. The lessons. Then I answered honestly. The old version of us is. And I walked away. Because sometimes taking back your life doesn't mean destroying someone else's. Sometimes it means finally choosing yourself. The woman who once told me I was no longer valuable eventually learned the truth. I was never fighting to prove my worth. I was fighting to remember it myself. 6 months had passed since the day I walked back into Hayes Global. 6 months since the boardroom where everything changed. 6 months since Victoria finally saw the man behind the silence. But life has a strange way of moving forward. The world expected a dramatic ending. They expected me to take control of the company. They expected Victoria to lose everything. They expected revenge. But that was never the story. The real story was about understanding what happens when you spend years building someone else's dream and forget to build your own. After the board meeting, Hayes Global changed. Not overnight. Not through some dramatic announcement. Real change rarely happens that way. It happens through small decisions. Through difficult conversations. Through people finally accepting the truth. Victoria remained CEO. But she became a different leader. The first thing she changed was something simple. She started listening. Not just hearing people speak. Actually listening. She began asking questions she once thought she already knew the answers to. She started reviewing the agreements. The history. The foundation. Everything she had ignored because she believed success was only measured by the person standing in front of the cameras. And slowly, the company began healing. Not because I returned. Because Victoria finally understood why it existed. I watched from a distance. Not because I was trying to punish her. Because I needed to learn how to live without carrying someone else's world on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I focused on myself. I started a new company. A smaller one. A quieter one. No headlines. No awards. No need to prove anything. Just work that mattered to me. Olivia stayed by my side. Not as someone working for me. As someone who believed in the person I was before everyone else decided who I should become. One evening, months after everything happened, I received a message from Victoria. Not a business message. Not a formal request. Just one sentence. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. Because some messages are difficult not because you don't know the answer, but because you already do. I agreed. We met at the same small coffee shop where we first talked about building Hayes Global. The place where two young people once believed they could create something impossible. Victoria arrived early. That surprised me, because the Victoria I knew always made other people wait. She looked different. Not weaker, not broken, just more honest. She looked at me for a moment before speaking. I spent years thinking I was the reason everything succeeded. I stayed quiet. She continued. And the truth is, I was only able to succeed because someone believed in me before I believed in myself. The words were difficult for her. I could tell. People like Victoria were not used to admitting mistakes, especially mistakes that changed their entire identity. I'm sorry, Ethan. 2 words. Simple, but not easy. I looked down at my coffee. There was a time when those words were all I wanted. A time when one apology could have changed everything. But time changes what you need. I believe you're sorry, I said. She looked up. But, I smiled slightly. But being sorry doesn't always bring things back. She nodded, because she understood. For the first time, she wasn't trying to negotiate. She wasn't trying to win. She was simply accepting. And maybe that was the biggest change of all. Victoria had spent years trying to prove she was powerful. Now she finally understood that real strength was admitting when you were wrong. Before we left, she asked one final question. Do you hate me? I looked at her. The woman who was once my entire world. The woman who broke my heart. The woman who helped me discover myself again. No, she looked surprised. I don't hate you. I paused. I just stopped losing myself trying to save you. Those words were not meant to hurt her. They were meant to free me. As I walked away from that coffee shop, I realized something. Victoria thought she took everything from me when she fired me. She thought she ended my place in her life when she divorced me. But she was wrong. The day she removed me from her empire was the day I finally started building my own. Because sometimes the greatest comeback is not making someone regret losing you. It is becoming someone you are proud to be. The quiet person in the room. The person nobody noticed. The person everyone underestimated. Was never powerless. He was simply waiting for the right moment to choose himself. And that moment finally came.